Shut it down. Admiral Troon Vilex's voice thundered, his command slicing through the tense silence of the bridge. The officers scrambled, their hands frantic on the controls, as a sudden glitch sent shockwaves across the Kairos systems. A bright flash erupted on the heads-up display, and the entire bridge lurched underfoot as the ship rattled violently. Ensign Korov, what the hell is happening? Valex demanded, his hand gripping the back of the chair for support. Korov's voice came through, strained and barely controlled. It's a system breach, sir. We're losing all readings. It's scrambling the data. No sign of the Aurora, sir. It's just gone. Valex stood motionless for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the situation. He had been part of military campaigns, led fleets into combat, but this was unlike anything he'd faced before. The Aurora was supposed to be the harbinger of Earth's return to galactic affairs, but now it was a phantom ship lost in the void. Sir, there's a faint signal. A trace, Korov added, his voice rising with a mixture of fear and disbelief. But it's different. It doesn't make sense. Valex's lips pressed into a thin line. Calculate. The mission was supposed to be simple. Investigate the disappearance of Earth's ships and confirm whether the Terran Empire had fallen into irrelevance, as the Galactic Council believed. But what they had encountered was anything but simple. What do you mean different? This is no time for cryptic reports. Korov's fingers hovered over the console, his face pale as he spoke. It's human, but not in a way we understand. It's like the signal itself is evolving, changing as we try to analyze it. Evolving. Valex's eyes snapped to the display, his mind working rapidly. This was something far beyond the ordinary. Increase power to scanners. I want the full spectrum analyzed. Now. Korov complied, his hands flying across the control. The Kairos crept forward, cutting through the blackness of space, its trajectory aimed at the coordinates where the Aurora had last been detected. Tension ran high as the officers aboard the bridge waited for something to happen. But there was nothing, no signs of life, no immediate threat, just a creeping unease that twisted in the pit of their stomachs. A moment later, the ship's heads-up display flickered, displaying a single line of text that made the air in the bridge go still. We've evolved. Korov's hands froze. The words pulsed on the screen like a heartbeat. What the hell does that mean? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Valex's gaze remained cold, unblinking, his mind always sharp, was already processing, connecting dots. It's Earth. It's not what we expected. Korov turned to the Admiral, disbelief etched on his face. Earth? But they've been silent for decades. The Council, we thought they've adapted. Valex interrupted, his voice low and calculating. We've been fools to underestimate them. The ship continued its slow approach, the blackness of space pressing in from all sides. No more signals, no signs of life, yet the message was clear. Earth had not disappeared. They had simply retreated into the shadows, allowing the galaxy to believe them irrelevant, while they perfected something far more dangerous: intellectual supremacy. They weren't just silent. They were watching, planning, manipulating, far beyond anyone's comprehension. Report, Valex barked. His mind was already racing ahead, trying to anticipate their next move. Korov's voice wavered as he checked the scanners once again. We're almost at the coordinates. Still nothing, sir. No ships, no debris, no energy signatures. It's as if they were never here. Valex's lips curled into a grim smile, though there was no humor in it. He turned to his crew, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Prepare to drop to full stop. We're about to make history. Korov's hands were still trembling as he complied. The Kairos slowed, creeping toward the dead zone where the Aurora had last been. The vastness of space seemed to stretch out infinitely before them, every second bringing them closer to the unknown. A sudden burst of static filled the bridge. It was followed by a deeper hum, like a pulse, emanating from the heart of the Kairos. On the heads-up display, a new set of symbols appeared. They were not from any known alien race, not from the galaxy's standard systems. They were human, only they weren't, not anymore. What in the hell? Korov whispered under his breath. The Admiral's hand shot out, his fingers pressing firmly on the command console. Full diagnostic. Now, the ship's systems were not responding the way they should. The lights flickered, the readouts began to slow, and the eerie hum of static grew louder. more insistent. The Kairos was being attacked, siphoned, perhaps but not by weapons, by something more subtle, something that burrowed into the very heart of their technology. Admiral, Korov's words were cut short as the display blinked, once more filling with new, unreadable symbols. Then the text appeared, clear and chilling. You're too late. Korov's breath caught in his throat. He had expected an enemy ship to appear, a trap, a battlefield. But this was something else. The words were simple, yet their meaning was as devastating as any weapon. The ship shuddered again, this time with more force. Valex could feel the shift in the air, a subtle vibration that set his teeth on edge. He looked to his officers, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Divert power to shields. We're not alone. The officers scrambled, their minds now fully aware of the situation they had walked into. There were no ships in sight, no immediate threats, but something far worse was happening. Earth had not merely vanished. They had watched, and they had planned. Sir, I'm getting another message, Korov said, his voice shaking as he read from the display. The words were short, direct and unmistakable. The war has begun. Valex's hand gripped the armrest so tightly, it seemed as if it might crack under his finger. He turned to face his crew, his voice cutting through the rising tension. Prepare for impact, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. And then, with a final, decisive motion, he pressed the command for the next phase of the mission. The Kairos surged forward, ready to face the unknown. But the battle had already begun. The bridge fell into a sharp, frozen silence, as the crew braced for whatever would come next. Damn it! Sarn Velik's voice echoed through the command deck, sharp and cutting against the tense hum of the ship. The Narath's forward viewport blazed with the star-streaked blur of their approach to Earth's orbit. Yet a creeping sense of wrongness lurked in the atmosphere. The laser plasma displays flickered, static crawling across the screens. Something was off, and Velik could feel it pressing against his chest, making every breath a struggle. Status, Lieutenant, he barked, turning his gaze toward the tactical officer, who stood hunched over his console, brow furrowed in confusion. Lieutenant Cross's hands flew over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air of the bridge. We're getting multiple false readings, sir. Ships, multiple ships, but they're not holding steady on the scans. Some are there, then gone. It's like they're moving faster than our sensors can track. But that's not possible. Velik's eyes narrowed, scanning the fluctuating data with meticulous focus. The Narath wasn't built to deal with these kinds of anomalies. It was a tactical vessel designed for firepower, not for deep space detective work. But here they were, on the brink of something that didn't just defy military expectations, it bent the very laws of perception. Run another diagnostic, double-check every system, Velik commanded, his voice a steady calm that masked the churning unease underneath. The crew obeyed, tension thickening like smoke in the small confines of the bridge. He turned his back to the officers, leaning forward to study the heads-up display on the wall, where a series of strange erratic flickers distorted their data stream. There, in the midst of the chaos, a single line of text appeared. Why do you search for us? It blinked in bright, unnatural red, like a wound on a perfectly healthy body. What's this? Velik muttered under his breath, his mind racing as he tried to grasp at something familiar, something tangible in this sea of impossibility. But it was impossible. The text human, yet was not something that should be appearing on a military scan. Lieutenant Cross looked up from his console, visibly shaken. Sir, that message, it came from inside the ship's systems. It's not coming from Earth. It's coming from us, Velik finished for him, his voice low, like the words themselves were too dangerous to utter aloud. The Narath wasn't just encountering interference. It was being pulled into something tangled in a web of perception itself, and Earth's absence had been a lie. Earth had never been absent at all. They had been waiting, watching, working. Continue scans, Velik ordered sharply, turning his attention back to the vast darkness ahead. But even as the officers obeyed, something in the air had shifted. Every officer on the bridge could feel it, the subtle hum of unease turning into something sharper, more dangerous. Just as Cross initiated another diagnostic, a series of new readings came in. Blips on the radar, ships appearing in random patterns, then vanishing in mere seconds. They couldn't even determine if they were friend or foe. Deploy auxiliary drones to track, Velik commanded, his thoughts already racing ahead. I don't care if we have to track shadows. We're getting answers one way or another. The drones, small, sleek, and equipped with all the necessary surveillance tools, shot out from the Narath's launch bay. They moved with calculated precision, but as they approached the coordinates where the phantom ships had been detected, their sensors scrambled. The connection was lost. The drones flickered in and out of existence, as though something unseen was deliberately severing their signal. "This isn't normal," Cross said, his voice growing quieter with each passing second. This can't be happening. Ships just don't disappear." Velik's face hardened. "Prepare the crew for possible battle, but don't fire unless I give the order." The tension on the bridge reached a boiling point. Officers exchanged anxious glances, their hands hovering over weapons and comms. No one had ever been prepared for this. No one had ever trained for a war of perception, a battle fought in the mind. Just then another message appeared, this one more cryptic than the last. "You haven't learned yet. What does it mean to fight a ghost?" "Enough," Velik snapped, slamming his hand down on the console in front of him. The bridge fell into silence, save for the faint clatter of keys and the dissonant hum of malfunctioning systems. He paced, fists clenched, struggling to control the sudden swell of panic that threatened to break through his disciplined exterior. His mind was on Earth, but not the Earth they had known. No, this was a new Earth, one that had been submerged in the dark for far too long, perfecting its greatest weapon. He knew it now. This wasn't just a battle of ships. Earth was fighting them with something far more insidious, the weaponization of reality itself. Cross hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, we're seeing more distortions. Everything is starting to break apart." Velik spun to face him. "What do you mean, break apart?" Cross's eyes widened, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The crew, some of them are starting to lose focus. It's like the ship itself is playing tricks on us. Shifted images, warped perception. A loud bang cut through the air, startling everyone on the bridge. One of the officers, Lieutenant Jarn, collapsed to the floor, his hands clutching his head, groaning in agony. "It's alive," Jarn screamed, his voice raw with terror. "It's in the ship. It's inside us." His eyes were wide, wild with panic. Velik moved quickly, grabbing Jarn by the shoulder and pulling him up, his voice commanding, "Focus. Lieutenant, this is not the time for hysteria." But Jarn's eyes glazed over, and his hands trembled as he looked around wildly. "The ship. It's alive. It knows us. It's controlling us." Before Velik could respond, Jarn's body went rigid, his breath quickened, then slowed to a stop, his eyes vacant. "Get him out of here," Velik ordered, stepping back, his gaze hardening. He could already see it, how Earth's influence was creeping into their minds, unraveling their perceptions, turning allies against one another. "We're losing control," Velik muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the chaos before him. "Earth isn't just playing with ships or soldiers. They've learned to control thoughts," Admiral Cross said quietly, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "There's another message coming through." Velik turned to the display. Another line of text blinked, cruel in its simplicity. "Do you understand now?" A tremor ran through the crew as the full scope of Earth's strategy began to settle into their minds. The Nurath was trapped in a war with no ships, no weapons, just minds, and now, Earth was rewriting their reality. Velik took a deep breath, turning to his officers with renewed determination. "The war is here, and we've been blind to it. Prepare yourselves. We fight not with guns or ships, but with our minds. We fight Earth's game." And as the crew fell into tense silence, Velik's resolve hardened. "Start talking, Velik." The voice crackled through the comms. "You said you were ready. Now show us why." Admiral Sarn Velik's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair as the laser plasma displays flared with incoming transmissions. His eyes scanned the data, but the numbers, those familiar figures, seemed to be shifting, changing. His breath grew shallow, caught in the snare of what was unfolding across the galaxy. Earth's subtle influence was beginning to weave its way through the fabric of their systems, and he could feel it. He had thought it was just his crew, a few isolated reports of strange behavior, but it wasn't. The Naroth was no longer just a ship. It was a vessel caught in the pulse of something far greater, something invisible but undeniable. "Sir," Lieutenant Cross whispered, his voice thin, strained. Are we seeing this? The entire quadrant's signals. They're scrambling. Social systems, civil infrastructure, all of it starting to break down. They're losing it." Velik didn't respond right away. His mind raced, each thought darkening the next. The heads-up display before him flickered again, a rapid progression of figures that twisted in impossible ways. Political systems, trading alliances, governments, all were faltering, as if someone had turned the key and unlocked chaos. And Earth's influence wasn't even visible. Yet here it was, subtly nudging the foundations of galactic society to the brink. They're losing their minds, Cross continued, his voice cracking. They're questioning everything, every decision, every law, every system. It's like Earth has twisted their perception. I can't explain it. Velik's gaze fixed on the officer, his eyes colder than any blade. What about our fleet? He needed facts, not emotion. Already in motion, sir, Cross said, tapping away at his console. His fingers moved too fast, but the data kept slipping away, sliding out of his grasp like oil. But they're picking up strange shifts in their own behavior. Their commands, their actions, nothing's lining up anymore. It's like what? Velik's patience snapped, impatience lacing his voice. Like the rules don't matter anymore, Cross whispered, as if the words themselves might summon something darker. Like they're being manipulated. The realization hit like a physical blow, a cold fist to the chest. Earth had never been about ships, never about weapons. It wasn't about physical dominance, it was about control. Control of perception, control of thought, control of decisions. A deep, systemic infection was running through the galaxy. Earth had planted the seed long ago, and now it was flowering into full view. The mental web had been cast. The galaxy's mind was not its own. Patch into the Council's emergency broadcast, Velik commanded. His voice was barely above a growl. Now, as the comms officer complied, the broadcast screen blinked to life. A series of high-ranking officials from the Galactic Council appeared, their faces grave, their voices already tinged with panic. Witnessing a significant degradation in system integrity, Councillor Kentar was saying, his voice thin and nervous. Citizens are rioting across multiple sectors. Entire planets are collapsing under internal strife. We are losing control. The broadcast sputtered, cutting off abruptly. A message, sharp and terrifying, blinked across the screen in cold red letters. You are not in control. The room froze. Velik's hand, hovering over the controls, tightened. He didn't need to ask who was behind this. Earth's influence was creeping into their minds, bypassing every safeguard, every firewall, every countermeasure they had. This wasn't a war of weapons or ships. This was a war of thoughts, of logic, of reality itself. Turn off the broadcast, Velik ordered quietly. This is bigger than we thought. Cross hesitated but did as commanded. The voices of the council dissolved into static. Velik's mind churned as he stared out into the void. The galaxy, once confident in its absolute control, was now showing cracks, fissures that ran deep. Systems were failing, civilizations were crumbling, and Earth was watching, pulling the strings from the shadows. Sir, Cross whispered, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. We've got another message. Not now, Velik snapped, rubbing his temple. The pressure of the situation was mounting. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down. He could almost hear the echoes of Earth's influence inside his own mind, whispering subtle things he couldn't ignore. Sir, Cross repeated, almost frantic. It's from the Aurora. Velik's head snapped around. The Aurora, Earth's last known scout ship. It had disappeared without a trace, or so they had thought. And now it was sending a message. From where? From what? Play it, Velik ordered, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. The screen flickered, and a voice crackled through the speakers. It was distorted, unrecognizable, but unmistakably human. The words were laced with something darker, a quiet certainty that sent chills crawling down Velik's spine. You are trapped in your own mind. The transmission cut off. The bridge fell into a deep, unnerving quiet. Velik's mind raced, every thought twisting around itself like a snake devouring its tail. Earth's reach was everywhere, and the galaxy was collapsing under its weight. It wasn't just war. It was a collapse of everything they had believed to be true. Sir, we've lost contact with the Nimru fleet, Cross said, his voice a distant echo. They've turned on each other. Get me a direct line to their commander, Velik said, his voice clipped. Now, a long pause. The silence on the other end stretched before an officer finally spoke. We can't, sir. They're no longer responding to our commands. They've turned on each other. Velik's breath caught in his throat. What? They're losing their minds, Admiral. One by one. We don't know what's happening. He stared at the screen, his thoughts spinning in a dizzying spiral. The Nimru fleet, one of their most powerful forces, was breaking apart, its commanders succumbing to Earth's influence. This wasn't just chaos. It was an intellectual breakdown. A war fought with the mind. A war Earth had been preparing for years. A war they had never expected. "Get me the council," Velik said, voice grim. "We need to address this before it's too late." But deep down he already knew. It was already too late. The galaxy had been manipulated, not through force, but through a careful, calculated breach of its own cognitive defenses. The galaxy's leaders, every mind that had thought it was safe, were now pawns in a game they didn't understand, and Earth was the master. The lights in the bridge flickered again, and as Velik turned back to the display, another message appeared. "The game has just begun. We've lost all control." The words from Admiral Velik were flat, devoid of hope, but they weren't the first of their kind. On the bridge of the Nereth, the atmosphere had long since thickened with tension. Officers shuffled at their stations, uneasy in their movements, their faces drawn and pale. Something had changed, and not just in the fleet but in themselves. Velik stood rigid at the command center, hands braced against the console. A message from Earth had just arrived, its text simple and unequivocal. "Your minds are not your own." Every attempt to trace its origin had failed. This was no longer just a battle of ships, but a struggle against their very consciousness. The creeping influence of Earth was no longer invisible, not some distant whisper. It was here, embedded in their every action, their every thought. "Lieutenant Cross," Velik's voice cut through the murmur. "What's the status of the Kaldor fleet?" Cross looked up, his eyes dull from lack of sleep. It's bad, sir. Half of the fleet's turned against the other half. There's no clear reason. Some commanders are acting like they've gone rogue. Their ships, their decisions don't make any sense. It's like they're being pushed. Velik's voice rose, sharp now. "Explain." "Manipulated. It's the only way I can put it. There's no logic, no strategy behind their movements. They're breaking down, Captain. The Kaldor is unraveling from the inside." Velik's jaw tightened. He had known this was coming. Earth's influence had slowly seeped in. But this was something different. It wasn't just sabotage. It was a fracturing of the very minds they depended on. The Kaldor fleet, once a symbol of the Galactic Council's might, was now turning against itself, undermined not by enemy fire, but by the quiet pull of Earth's psychological warfare. A soft ping interrupted the silence. Cross glanced at the incoming message, his eyes widening as he read it aloud. "There's no way back from this." Velik's breath caught. He turned to the crew, his gaze sweeping across their weary faces. Each of them, trained for war, for the control of their own fate, was now caught in a maelstrom of influence they couldn't escape. Earth had shown them only a glimpse of what it had planned. "We can't keep losing time," Velik muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He needed answers. He needed to find the source before the Nereth suffered the same fate as the Kaldor. "Get me a direct line to the Council," he ordered. As the connection established, the faces of the Galactic Council flickered to life on the display. High-ranking officials, their faces pale and exhausted, stared back at Velik. Their eyes betrayed an unmistakable fear. The Council had once been the center of power, the stewards of the galaxy's fate, but now they seemed like relics, empty figures caught in the web of Earth's design. "Admiral Velik," Counselor Kintar began, his voice shaky, "we've lost communication with several key fleets. Entire sectors have descended into chaos. We don't understand. It's as if every decision we make is being turned against us." Velik leaned forward, his voice low but controlled. "It's Earth, Counselor. They've engineered this. They're rewriting your decisions, your actions, from the inside. This isn't a war of ships. It's a war of minds." The room fell into heavy silence. They had heard the whispers, they had seen the report, but it was different when faced with the undeniable truth. The fear that had once been distant, theoretical, now gripped them in full force. "What do we do?" Kintar's voice cracked, unable to mask the terror. Velik turned away from the screen, his eyes narrowing as he considered their options. "We fight back," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "but not with ships or weapons. We have to outthink them. We have to pull ourselves out of their grasp before it's too late. You can't fight it." The voice came from the screen, cold, echoing in their mind. It was not a message from any known counselor. It was distorted, alien, but the words were unmistakable. "You cannot fight the mind." Velik slammed his fist against the console, anger flashing across his features. "Get me the source of that transmission now." But there was no reply, only the ominous hum of the communication line cutting off, leaving the bridge in stunned quiet. His breath came in ragged bursts as he struggled to maintain his composure. This was more than a battle. It was a test of willpower, of mental fortitude. Earth had become an invisible hand, twisting the galaxy to its whims without firing a single shot. "Captain," Cross spoke up, his voice trembling. "The Kaldor, they've been ordered to attack a neutral system, but the fleet commanders are still in a trance-like state. They're not acting under their own orders. They're responding to something else." "Something else?" Velik turned sharply to face Cross. "What are you talking about?" "They're being guided, sir," Cross continued, his hands shaking. "By Earth. It's not just the commander, the entire crew. They're following orders, but not from their leaders. It's as if Earth has hacked their thoughts, given them instructions that feel right, even if they're not." Velik's mind reeled. Earth had never been about physical warfare, never about overwhelming force. It was about control, about manipulating perceptions, until the enemy willingly tore itself apart. "It's not just the Kaldor," Cross said, barely audible. "It's happening all across the galaxy. Whole systems are falling. We're being driven to the brink of collapse." Velik's eyes burned with the intensity of his thoughts. They had underestimated Earth for so long. Now the price of that arrogance was clear. Earth wasn't just fighting a war. It was reshaping reality itself. "Prepare for the next phase," Velik said, his voice hard. "We'll need to infiltrate the Council's deepest communications. If we can't reach them through their own systems, we'll have to infiltrate their minds directly. We need to tear apart the web Earth's woven. We can't afford to lose more time." "Admiral, sir," Cross whispered, "you don't really think it's possible, do you? The Council, they won't." "They will." Velik cut him off, his eyes cold and unwavering. "We're past diplomacy. This is war, and Earth is already winning." As Velik turned to address the rest of the crew, the laser plasma displays flickered again, casting a cold, eerie light over the bridge. Their mission was no longer just survival. It was the last stand of a galaxy teetering on the edge of moral collapse. Earth's invisible influence had already infected the minds of those who once held power, and the fractures were growing deeper. "We will fight," Velik said, his voice unyielding, "but we will fight with our minds, or we won't fight at all." "Why the hell are they pulling back?" Captain Loris's voice cut through the chaos, his words raw with disbelief. The invasion fleet, once brimming with confidence, now faltered before Earth's orbit, frozen in indecision. Behind him, the command center of the Therian vanguard was in full disarray. The bridge, usually a place of calm focus, now hummed with confusion, each officer frantically scanning displays, trying to make sense of the messages flooding in. "They're not pulling back, sir," Lieutenant Veris said, eyes glued to the heads-up display. "They're stopping, changing course. Some are pointing weapons at each other. They're breaking formation." Loris's fingers curled into fists. His crew was trained for combat, not for this. This wasn't a battle. This was a systematic breakdown, an unraveling of their very command. Earth's influence had already sunk deep into their minds, and now they were watching it spread through their ranks like an infection. Ships once aligned in perfect synchronization had become chaos, turning on their comrades in the blink of an eye. "Contact the fleet commanders," Loris ordered, though he could already guess the answer. "No, wait. Redirect all communications. I want to know what the hell is happening on every single ship in this fleet." Static crackled over the comm, the communication systems warped by the growing cognitive confusion. Loris could hear the panic in his officers' voices as they tried and failed to regain control of the fleet. Then, in the midst of the chaos, a cold voice came through the line. "It's too late to stop this now." Loris's grip tightened on the console, his nails digging into the smooth surface. He knew that voice. That voice had haunted him during his training exercises. During the simulations, Commander Varric Roth, Earth's strategist, the mastermind behind the war that had never been fought with weapons, but with thought, the man who had engineered this downfall from the very beginning. And now, he was speaking directly into their minds, pulling the strings without lifting a finger. "We're already inside your heads," the voice continued, its coldness wrapping around Loris like a vice. "Every decision you make, every move you plan has been corrupted. You are lost, Captain. You've been lost for a long time." Loris's breath quickened, but he didn't break his stare from the screen. The battle was over. They hadn't even fought it yet. The fleet was crumbling, each ship lost in a spiral of paranoia, guided by nothing more than Earth's invisible hand. There is no victory here, the voice whispered, softer now, as if it were a reflection of his own thoughts. Only surrender. The words struck deep, unsettling the core of Loris's resolve. He had always believed in the system, in the strength of his fleet, in their collective purpose. But now everything was fracturing. His crew, his comrades, they were losing themselves. One by one, their will was bending to Earth's command. "Sir," Varys said, his voice quivering, "the ships, some of them are retreating, but others are moving forward, toward Earth. They're being forced into it, and there's nothing we can do to stop them." Loras slammed his fist into the console, sparks flying. "This can't be happening. We're the best in the galaxy. We're supposed to be invincible." But the truth was clear, hanging in the air like a bitter fog. Earth had already won, not through power, not through weapons, but by exploiting the very thing they had relied on: their minds. The war wasn't lost on the battlefield. It had been lost in the quiet manipulation of thought, in the slow erosion of will. On the Therian vanguard's display, the fleet commanders, once strong, once resolute, had become fragmented. Some issued orders to engage, others to retreat, and yet others still sat frozen, as if paralyzed by their own thought. The ships, once unified, now tore themselves apart, their crews caught in a storm of indecision, mistrust and fear. "We have to act now," Varys said, his voice barely a whisper, "before it's too late." But Loras knew it was already too late. The fleet was lost, its cohesion shattered beyond repair. They weren't fighting a battle anymore. They were fighting their own minds. In the command center of the Nerath, Verlic watched in grim silence as the results unfolded before him. Earth had outplayed them, and the true horror was just beginning to unfold. They had expected a military confrontation, weaponized ships, firepower, and tactics. What they had never anticipated was a war that would be fought on the battlefield of the mind. A war where every soldier, every officer, every leader became a pawn in Earth's game. The communication system flickered to life once more, this time with a direct transmission from the Council. Their faces were haggard, their eyes wide with terror. "Admiral," Counselor Kintar said, his voice trembling, "we're losing everything. Whole sectors are rebelling, turning against us. There's no way to stop it. Earth is manipulating us. We can't think straight. Every order we give feels wrong, feels like we're being led by invisible hand." Another message appeared on the screen. "You've been led by your own arrogance. Earth is already the master of your minds." A shudder ran through the council as they absorbed the finality of the words. Velek leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. This was the end, and it had not been won with weapons or ships. Earth had dismantled them, piece by piece, without them ever realizing it. The galaxy's once unshakable foundations had crumbled beneath the weight of Earth's intelligence, of its ability to manipulate perception, to plant ideas and dilemmas in their minds, and watch them destroy themselves. "Get me Commander Wrath," Velek said, his voice cold and steady. "It's time we end this." But deep down, he already knew. There was no victory here, only the slow, inevitable collapse. The final message from Earth flickered across the screen, the words simple and chilling: "The collapse has begun. Welcome to your new reality." As Velek turned to address his crew, the atmosphere on the bridge was suffocating, heavy with the realization that Earth had already achieved what they had once thought impossible, not with might, but with thought. The galaxy was unraveling, one mind at a time, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Is this it, Commander?" Counselor Kintar's voice came through the comm, taut with a mix of disbelief and rising dread. His face, once a symbol of untouchable authority, now appeared on the laser plasma display pale, drawn as if he'd aged years in mere days. "Are you telling me that Earth has orchestrated all of this?" This Varys Routh stood in front of the comm unit, his expression unreadable, eyes scanning the faces of the galaxy's leaders now displayed in front of him. The air around him was still, but in his mind everything churned, unraveling the intricate plans that had been set into motion so long ago. Routh had seen their reactions, heard their doubts. Now it was time for the truth to seep in. Slowly, inexorably, the last piece of Earth's psychological warfare had fallen into place. "You thought you controlled the galaxy," Routh began, his voice steady but laden with something deeper, something that felt like the calm before a storm. "But control was never the goal. What you failed to realize was that Earth was never going to fight you with brute force. Your ships, your weapons, your armies, they were always distractions, Kintar opened his mouth to speak, but Routh cut him off. You built empires on the belief that the galaxy is governed by power, Routh continued. But the real power lies in the minds of those who shape reality. You trusted in your strategies, in your military might, but you never thought to look deeper. He leaned in closer to the screen. That was your first mistake. The silence on the comm was deafening, and the faces on the display were frozen in a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. Routh felt no satisfaction in their reaction, only an inevitable sense of completion. He continued, his tone unwavering. For decades, Earth has quietly manipulated not just your minds but your systems. We didn't need to fight you with ships or armies. We manipulated your governments, your leaders, and your people from the inside. Counselor Kintar's brow furrowed. What do you mean manipulated? We trusted our systems, our codes. Yes, Routh interjected, almost gently. You did. But Earth planted the seeds long ago. We embedded recursive dilemmas into your decision-making processes. Subtle at first, but they grew deeper with every year. And now, every major decision you make, every order you give, has already been shaped by our design. The counselors blinked, as if their thoughts were trying to form words they couldn't grasp. But Routh knew that this moment, this awakening, would be one they could never undo. It was too late. The question you should have asked yourself, Routh said slowly, is not whether Earth would return to fight you. The question is, how long could you remain unaware that you were already at war? A low murmur spread through the room, but it was quickly silent. The magnitude of Routh's words was starting to sink in. They had never seen Earth as a threat, let alone a force capable of disrupting the very foundation of galactic power. But now they realized, Earth wasn't a force of weapons or ships, it was a force of thought. How many of you, counselors, Routh continued, have questioned your own decisions over the past few years? How many times have you second-guessed your strategies, your alliances, your very purpose? That's the work of. We've been inside your heads, planting doubt, pushing you toward decisions that would ensure your collapse. The faces of the council shifted from confusion to the grim understanding of their manipulation. They had been pawns, and they hadn't even known. Earth's plan was not just a series of battles or skirmishes. It was a slow, methodical takeover of the galaxy's leadership. Earth's final weapon, Routh said, his voice growing colder with finality, was never its ships. It was never the Narath, or the Cal. Earth's true weapon was the mind, yours, the council's, and the galaxy's. And in the end, it was you who fell prey to your own doubts. The counselors' faces grew pale, as Routh's words settled like a heavy weight, sinking deep into their collective consciousness. They had believed they controlled the flow of power, but in truth, Earth had always held the strings. And now, as they realized the depth of the manipulation, a quiet terror began to pulse in the room. Fear of the unknown, fear of the control they had lost without even knowing it. Commander, Counselor Vivian spoke, his voice shaky. What do you want from us? What will happen to the galaxy now? Routh's eyes flicked toward the screen, meeting Vivian's gaze. What I want, he said softly, is for you to understand that the collapse you've witnessed was never a failure of your fleets or your systems. It was the inevitable outcome of your own self-destruction. You cannot fight against what you cannot perceive. You cannot defend against an enemy that you believe does not exist. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle into the very fabric of the Council's fractured sense of power. Your war against Earth, Routh continued, was never about the destruction of ships or weapons. It was about the collapse of your perception of control, and you were already losing before you even realized you were at war. The transmission went quiet. The faces on the screen were unreadable, but the tension between them was palpable, thick with the remnants of their shattered certainty. And as Routh watched them, he knew that the final phase of Earth's silent revolution had been achieved. They were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. They were the broken remnants of a once great empire. Routh, Counselor Kintar finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Why tell us this now? What's your purpose? My purpose. Routh's voice softened, but his words rang with conviction. It is to show you that the battle is over. Earth has won, not with ships or armies, but with knowledge. You have been undone by your own minds, and you have no one to blame but yourselves. Routh turned away from the screen, his final words lingering in the air, like a sentence passed. And now, you will watch as the galaxy crumbles under the weight of your own fear. What do we do? The question hung in the air, trembling like the last strand of a broken spider's web. And for the first time, Admiral Villic had no answer. His fingers twitched across the console, inputting commands, watching them disappear into the void of malfunctioning systems. The Narath shook again, as the fleet continued its fall into chaos. Reports were flooding in, but none made sense anymore. The Therian vanguard, once a symbol of strength, had torn itself apart from within. Ships were turning on their crews, commanders were disoriented, and entire divisions had begun questioning their own orders, as if Earth had stolen the very foundation of their will. "We fight," Bellic muttered under his breath, but there was no conviction behind the words. The galaxy was not fighting. The galaxy was collapsing. "We cannot fight what we do not see," Cross said, his voice barely audible, his face drawn, like the weight of realization was pressing down on him, harder than any battle ever had. "Earth's influence. It's inside our mind. We're losing control over ourselves." Bellic turned to face his officer, his eyes hard and sharp, but even he couldn't ignore the sense of doom creeping into his thoughts. Every word Cross spoke was true. The galactic system was failing, not because Earth's ships were superior, but because Earth had long ago learned to exploit the one thing no empire, no warship, could defeat: the mind. "Contact the Council." Bellic's voice was a bark, but the desperation behind it was undeniable. "I need their response, now." The comms officer punched in the coordinates, but the transmission only came back garbled, static cutting through every word. "Your calls are futile, Admiral," the distorted voice that filled the comm system said, laced with a cold, unsettling calmness. It was the same voice Bellic had heard before. Routh's voice. "There's nothing left for you to grasp onto. The Council, your fleets, your minds are mine now." Bellic's hand clenched around the edge of the console. There was nothing left to fight. Earth had breached every layer of their defenses, not with fire or fury but with subtlety, with fear, with cognitive manipulation. The galaxy had been reduced to a battlefield of broken thought. Ships and planets weren't crumbling from lack of resources or strategy. They were crumbling because their leaders, their generals, were caught in loops, their perceptions shattered. "Sir, the Virion fleet," Cross's voice faltered. "They've declared their surrender and turned their weapons on the Kaldor." "What is happening?" Bellic gritted his teeth, taking a step back from the console as his mind raced. He had prepared for combat, for strategy, for tactical brilliance. He had not prepared for the Narath was supposed to be his ship of resolve, his bastion against Earth's growing influence, but now it felt like a tomb, and they were all trapped inside it. "They're not making decisions anymore," Bellic murmured, his mind leaping ahead. He couldn't afford to think like a soldier anymore. This was a game of thought, of intellect, and the rules had been rewritten. Earth had broken the laws of warfare, of psychology, and of belief. They had infected every thought, every leader, every decision. "What are we supposed to do?" Cross asked, his voice sharp with panic. Bellic's eyes turned cold as ice. "We do what Earth never expected." He gripped the arm of his chair, his voice low but fierce. "We turn their tactics against them. We break the loops." Cross looked confused, his brow furrowing. "Break the loop? How?" "By thinking differently," Bellic replied, his gaze flicking to the nearest officer. "We stop playing by their rules. If Earth controls our minds with recursive traps, we have to find a way to think outside of them." The bridge was full of activity, but it felt like it was happening in another dimension, another reality. The officers were still moving, but there was no certainty in their actions. They were all too aware that they were part of the collapsing system. "You will not outsmart me, Admiral." Routh's voice echoed again, now more chilling than before. "There's no escape from what you've become." Bellic felt a cold tremor run through him. It wasn't just Routh's voice. It was everything Earth had built. The entire galaxy, once so full of pride and order, had been quietly dismantled from the inside. It was only a matter of time before the final collapse. "Sir," one of the officers spoke up, breaking through the fog of despair. "The Virion fleet. They've turned on their own. Weapons are being fired on the Kaldor. On us. They're losing their minds, and so are we. Everything is breaking down." Bellic's grip tightened around the console again. He had watched wars, seen battles won and lost. But this wasn't a fight of ships. This wasn't a fight of strength. This was a war waged on the mind, and it was a war Earth had already won. "We need to stop it." Cross's voice trembled. "We need to stop Earth from—" "You cannot stop what you don't understand." Routh's voice came once more, this time impossibly close, as if it were slipping through the very walls of the Narath. "I am in your minds. I am in your every thought." "Damn you," Bellic hissed, his breath ragged. You've already won. He stood there, staring at the laser plasma displays as they flickered and blurred, the images of breaking fleets and fracturing worlds, blending into a distorted, surreal image. Earth had broken them, all of them, not with weapons but with something far worse, with the mind. The Council's desperate attempts to hold their empire together were failing. The fleets were no longer responding. The generals had lost themselves in endless recursive loops, questioning their every order. The galaxy was falling apart, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. You thought you had control, Routh's voice taunted, now all-encompassing, sinking into every corner of their thoughts. But control was never the goal. I never wanted power, Admiral. I only wanted you to understand that you were already lost. Bellick gripped the console tighter, his knuckles white. The finality of Routh's words hit him like a physical blow. There was no victory left. Earth had outsmarted them all. The galaxy was unraveling, and there was nothing left to hold on to. The once mighty fleets of the Council, now reduced to splintered fragments of their former selves, were trapped in the most insidious war of all, a war against their own mind. The collapse was not just physical, it was intellectual. It was a collapse of belief, of thought, of will. Earth had won. And as Bellick looked out across the shattered galaxy, he realized Earth's final weapon was something no one had ever prepared for. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't a weapon, it was the control of thought itself. Launch the fleet, now. Counselor Kintar's voice cracked through the calm, frantic, yet there was no force behind it anymore. It was the last thread of control, and he knew it. His hands trembled as he stared at the heads-up display, watching the fleet he had commanded for years slip further into disarray. The Virion had turned, just like the others, ships that once held together in perfect formation, now scattered like broken pieces of a puzzle, each one moving on its own accord, no longer adhering to any order given. The fleet had already been infected by Earth's subtle manipulation, and now it was too late. A cold, mechanical voice broke through the static, filling the room. It was Earth's voice, as it had been before, like a presence slipping between thought. You cannot outrun what is already inside you. The voice murmured, as though it were not speaking from a ship, but from every corner of their minds. The collapse is inevitable. There is no escape. Kintar slammed his fist against the console, his frustration building into a terrifying fury. We have to act. We have to reclaim. Reclaim. Earth's voice interrupted, now louder, sharper, almost mocking. Your minds are already fractured. You are nothing more than shadows of your former selves. The words hit like a slap, and Kintar recoiled as though physically struck. They had tried. For hours they had fought to regain control, to reassert some semblance of order, but Earth had already locked them into a psychological snare. They had been playing into Earth's hand from the very start, believing that war could be won with ships and strategies. But Earth had manipulated them at their core. Their own thoughts, their very decisions, had been engineered to bring them here, bring them to this moment of collapse. How could we not have seen it? Kintar whispered, his voice trembling, eyes wide in shock. How could we be so blind? The truth is, Counselor, Commander Vyrek Routh's voice cut through the haze, steady and unwavering. You were never meant to see it. We allowed you to believe in your dominance. And now, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle like dust. Now it is time for you to understand what true power is. On the Therian Vanguard, now just another crumbling ship and a collapsing fleet, Admiral Loris stood frozen, staring at the control panel in front of him. The reports were the same, but they had gotten worse. The remaining ships in his fleet had stopped listening to him entirely. Some were simply sitting still, others were firing on each other, their weapons locked in place by Earth's influence. This is madness, Loris muttered, his voice thin. We should be firing. We should be attacking. But his own mind felt sluggish, like something had pressed a weight against it. A fog that distorted every thought. One of his officers, Commander Zarin, looked up at him, her eyes wild with fear. They're controlling us, sir. It's inside all of us. We're losing. We're falling apart. Loris turned on her sharply. I am not losing control. But as he looked at the panicked expressions of his officers, the truth crept in. He wasn't in control. Not of his crew, not of his fleet, and certainly not of his own. A message flickered onto the main display, one that could have only come from Earth. He read it slowly, his heart sinking with each word. The galaxy is already mine. Your victory was never possible. The war has been over for some time. Damn you, Loris whispered, clenching his fist. You will pay for this. But deep down, he knew the fight was over. Earth had won, not through ships, not through technology, but through control over the minds of those who thought themselves invincible. Their strategies had been nothing more than distraction. Every order, every attempt to reclaim control, had already been anticipated, planted, and manipulated. On the council's bridge, Councillor Kintar slowly lowered his head in resignation. "It's done," he murmured, his voice distant. "We've lost. Earth's influence has spread too far. We are not even our own masters anymore. We've become slaves to our own thoughts, our own doubts. The galactic systems that had once been so powerful, so invulnerable, were now grinding to a halt. Communications were failing. Governments were falling. The military structures, once the backbone of galactic order, were disintegrating. Whole sectors were descending into anarchy, their leaders torn apart by recursive loops of indecision. Entire fleets were turning on one another, caught in Earth's trap, their very minds betraying them. "We should have known," Kintar whispered again, as though speaking to himself. "How could we not have known? Because you were never supposed to." Ralph's voice replied, soft but cutting through the confusion like a knife. "It was never about control. It was always about the mind. The rest was just the illusion of war." The gravity of Earth's plan settled over the galaxy like an irreversible collapse. There would be no recovery, no rebuilding. This was not the end of a battle. This was the end of everything the galaxy had stood for. Earth had not just defeated them. It had dismantled their very understanding of power, of governance, and of reality itself. The fleets were no more. The armies had fallen. The systems, the alliances, the governments, they were all crumbling, disintegrating, under Earth's weight. And all the Council could do now was watch as the galaxy unraveled before them. On the bridge of the Therian vanguard, Loras stood motionless, his fists clenched, his mind too fractured to think. His crew, once loyal, were scattered in their thoughts, unable to comprehend the horror that had been unleashed. There was no turning back. "We were blind," Kintar murmured, as the final message from Earth flickered once more on their screens. "The galaxy belongs to the mind." And with that, the final threads of galactic power were severed. Earth had won, not with weapons, not with ships, but with the quiet, unrelenting force of intellectual control. The galaxy had fallen. "You feared our ships." Commander Vierik Roth's voice sliced through the tension of the galactic assembly chamber, its resonance holding the weight of finality. The Council, once the proud rulers of the galaxy, now sat before him, shattered, their faces drained of the arrogance that had once defined them. Ralph's words were not spoken with malice, but with a quiet, unshakable authority, as if he were stating an undeniable truth. "You feared our ships," he repeated, his gaze sweeping over the Council's broken ranks. "You forgot our minds." The words echoed in the cavernous chamber, a cold reminder of how easily the galaxy had been manipulated, led into a war they never stood a chance of winning. The truth was now inescapable. Earth had already won, not through military might, not through ships or weapons, but by something far more insidious: intellectual superiority. The Council, gathered in their grand hall, looked nothing like the formidable empire they had once been. Their faces were haunted, eyes wide and searching for a way to undo the impossible. Ralph had already unraveled their defenses, their unity, their will. Now only confusion and regret remained. "You thought your fleets could overwhelm us," Ralph continued, his tone cold and deliberate. "You thought that physical power was the final measure of strength. But we've never needed ships. Earth's greatest weapon was never in its fleets. It was in its ability to make you believe in your own superiority, while we quietly rearranged the galaxy's very foundation." One of the councilors, still holding on to a shred of defiance, raised his voice. You think you can rewrite the rules. You'll never control the galaxy." Ralph's eyes glinted with a calm certainty that chilled to the bone. "It's too late for that, Counselor. The galaxy's fate was sealed long ago, long before you ever realized it. You weren't just defeated on the battlefield. You were defeated in your own minds. Your paranoia, your insecurities, your inability to trust one another. That's what shattered you." A tense silence followed his word. The Council, once a symbol of absolute power, could only sit there exposed and powerless. They had been manipulated on a scale they couldn't even fathom. Their systems, their decisions, their very strategies had been guided by Earth's unseen hand for years. And now, the cost of their arrogance was clear. "You were never in control," Ralph continued, his voice low but filled with undeniable authority. "Not of your fleets, not of your minds, not of your galaxy. Kantar, the head of the council, leaned forward, his face twisted in disbelief. You orchestrated all of this. The Narath, the collapse of the fleets, the internal strife, was that you? Routh nodded once, slowly. It was always me. It was always Earth. The finality of his words sank into the chamber like a stone sinking into water. The ripple effects of their realization spread throughout the room, paralyzing them with horror. Earth had never needed a physical battle. It had won with something more profound, more enduring, the ability to control perception, to dismantle their enemies from within, one thought at a time. We gave you the illusion of power, Routh said, his voice smooth, almost philosophical. You were allowed to feel that you were in control, to build your empire on the foundation of your beliefs. But those beliefs were nothing more than our design. Every decision you made, every step you took, was nudged, shaped, and directed. We didn't need to attack. We simply planted the seeds of doubt. The rest, you did to yourself. One of the counselors, unable to bear the weight of Routh's words any longer, shouted, "You can't. This isn't how it's supposed to end. We had the galaxy in our grasp." Routh's gaze softened just slightly, but there was no sympathy there. This is how it ends. The galaxy's downfall wasn't because Earth was weak. It was because you never thought to look beyond your own strength. Your empire crumbled under the weight of its own hubris. Earth understood something you never did. True power isn't in armies. It's in the mind. The room went cold as the council's leaders stared at Routh, the reality of their defeat settling in like an unbearable weight. They had been defeated not through strength, but through the quiet, methodical control of their very thoughts. Earth had already won. There would be no battle, no final confrontation. It was all over. "The galaxy is mine now," Routh said softly, the words carrying the gravity of finality. "You are nothing more than shadows in the wake of Earth's victory. You were always destined to fall." Kantar's face crumpled, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "But what happens now?" "Now," Routh's voice was calm, yet the finality of it reverberated in the air. "Now, the galaxy will rebuild, but it will rebuild in Earth's image. Our image. You've had your chance, and you've lost." Routh turned, as if the conversation was over, but before he could take another step, Kantar spoke again, his voice trembling. "Will you leave us to rot?" Routh paused, then turned back, his gaze piercing. "No. You will live on, but you will no longer lead. Earth's influence will shape the future now. You will watch as the galaxy changes in ways you cannot comprehend. Your minds will be freed from your grasp, and in time, you will realize just how little you truly matter." The laser plasma displays flickered one last time, and the message from Earth was clear. It was not a message of victory, not one of triumph. It was a simple, undeniable statement. "You have lost." Routh turned his back on the council, leaving them in their shattered state, broken by the very thing they had ignored, the power of the mind. As the doors to the galactic assembly closed behind him, Routh spoke to no one in particular, but the words carried the weight of an entire galaxy's defeat. "We feared their ships, we forgot our minds." And with that, Earth's final victory was complete.